Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Nonfiction November, of course, and that's an event hosted by Olive at a Book Olive and Gemma at Nonfic Books, designed to celebrate nonfiction, my beloved nonfiction, uh, throughout the course of November. To urge you to read some if you read none, and to read more if you already do read some. And I want to do that. Of course, I want to urge you to do that. That's I do that all the time on this channel. And I recently made a video with 9 nonfiction November recommendations. I want to do another one with 9 more recommendations. Who knows how many of these I will do, because there's such an enormous splendor of nonfiction out there in the world that who knows what you have or have not had stuffed right under your nose. So I want to start with a couple of nature titles, because they're one of the most accessible ways to get into the world of nonfiction. The first one is this: Tom McAneme's The Grizzly Bear. With the subject right there on the cover. This is a natural history of the grizzly bear, and it's full of anecdotal evidence and folklore and the latest science and tons of firsthand observation. And it's beautifully written, sharply, wittily written. It's the best book. I've read ever so many books on the grizzly bear, and it's the best book by far that I've read on the subject. Those of you who have those of you who have been lucky enough never to come anywhere near such a creature, the things that you see, the depressed, emaciated things that you see at a zoo, for instance, don't do justice to the genuine item. I have hiked all over the world. I have hiked all over central Russia, where their grizzly bears are as common as gophers. And I've also hiked all over the American West and and up north near and also in Canada. And the mercurial, terrifying aspect of the grizzly bear is caught perfectly in this book, even though the writer is sympathetic towards them. He at no point is saccharine towards them, and so you get horrifying stories. Not just an encounter with a grizzly bear in a hike anywhere, but even an encounter just with grizzly bear sign on a hike anywhere is a complete game changer. And I don't know how to. I mean, of course, anybody who's watching this video, especially people who've never hiked, never been really out in the wilderness, will say, well, of course, yes, bears are frightening. But no, no, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. It's not the same thing as a black bear, for instance, which can still kill you, but which is much smaller than you are, and usually timid, and usually governed by sense. A black bear will want to expend the least energy possible at any time. That's just sensible. And it's also not the same thing as polar bears, which I've also encountered in the wild, and which are, if anything, bigger than grizzly bears. But it doesn't feel the same, because polar bears you only encounter, or at least I've only ever encountered them, in circumstances that are already bizarre. They're already otherworldly. So the fact that there are alien creatures in such circumstances, in such environments, it seems of a piece. A grizzly bear is like a science fiction mutated human. Encountering an adult grizzly bear in the wild, when you don't have any easy technological means of escape, is much like encountering the Incredible Hulk. They're absolutely enormous. They're incredibly fast, and they're incredibly aggressive. I won't tell any stories now. I was largely immunized from the grizzlies that I encountered out in the middle of nowhere. In the middle of nowhere, I was largely immunized against the worst of those encounters because I was traveling in all cases with a large entourage of dogs. And although a grizzly bear standing up on his hind feet and surprised and looking at a human will think, well, I had probably better, before I go about my business of grubbing berries, rip that thing to pieces just for the fun of it. A grizzly bear won't tend to make that decision if there's a crowd of howling dogs accompanying that stand-up figure. But let me tell you, before we move on to the next book, let me tell you, if you're hiking on a beautiful late spring day and you come out of the trees and enter a wonderful tall grass meadow, and the birds are chirping and the blue sky is overhead and the sun feels warm on your skin and you're feeling wonderful. This was a great way to unwind from your job reading signatures at a bank in Manhattan. And you take a few steps, and then a football field away from you, at the other end of the meadow where it breaks into trees again, a grizzly bear stands up from what it was doing and looks at you across that meadow. Your life will flash before your eyes. And something, a large amount of that dramatic charge is conveyed in this book. It's well worth it as a substitute for experiencing the real thing. The next nature recommendation I'm going to make, I think these might be the only two. No, there's another nature recommendation. That's another classic. This was a classic too, but it's a completely other end of the spectrum. This is a wild animal that you wouldn't worry about meeting. This is A Sloth in the Family, by I don't have the author here. The introduction to this volume, the author's name is now off the top of my head it's going to escape me. But the introduction to this book is by Gerald of Wales, but he's not the author, and it's the story of a family that takes in a sloth. And I have met three-toed sloths in the wild, and the reports from this family are completely true. There's no such thing as a wild sloth. If by wild we mean afraid of humans. You can pry an adult male sloth off a tree, set him down in your lap, and feed him little bits of apple. He will grasp your arm and guide it towards his mouth and eat it happy as could be right there on your lap. And he'll stay there. He'll sleep there. And this is a sloth who's, as far as you know, never encountered nor been touched by a human before. And this family takes in one. And the book is full of color photos, adorable color photos, and lots and lots of informal natural history. I think that probably like the McNamee book, this is probably out of print, but well worth your time looking for at a library. And the next one is a descriptive work. It's a classic. It's ancient. There was a dearth of those in the last one of these videos, so I thought I'd make up for it. This is two books from the long shelf of best-selling books by the best-selling author of his day. And that's Gerald of Wales, a medieval cleric who wrote, he took a journey through Wales and wrote about it. He made a natural history description of Wales, its rivers, its mountains, its creatures. And his Latin is wonderful. It really is. And these Penguin translations, this old volume, I don't know. Penguin, this might still be in print. You never know. Gerald of Wales is a fascinating character, absolutely fascinating. And these Penguin translations, I think they did this volume and one other, managed to capture some of the really curly-Q fun and intellectual adventure of his Latin. So if you're in the mood, especially if you live in Wales, you really owe it to yourself to read this guy. He's delightful. And the next one is it's an essay. It's also a tough sell. If Gerald of Wales is a tough sell, then this one will be too. And if a handful of you have known me forever in real life, and if you're watching this video and you see Gerald of Wales, you're probably thinking, oh God, who's he going to mention next? And you're right. It's John Dryden. My beloved John Dryden. This is his essay on dramatic poesy, and it's a long prose work about the poetry of his day and about the theory of poetry just in general. And it is, in my opinion, the towering founding work of literary criticism, of written literary response in the modern era. Dryden did a lot. He broke a lot of ground in a lot of ways and doesn't get credit for any of it. And this is him pretty much single-handedly creating my profession. And it reads wonderful. This is just a cover that I pulled off the internet because I like the look of it. I've never seen it. I have a couple of different editions, and editions still appear. And that's good. I'm glad that at least a tiny fraction of Dryden survives. But believe it or not, even though it's John Dryden, who you probably think is boring, and even though the title has an antique flavor to it, if you were to open this essay and start to read it, I bet you would like it. it's a very modern feeling, in a way, a very modern feeling approach to reading. That I think would appeal on book 2. The next one is another nature book. I've recommended it on this channel many times, I think. I've recommended it in real life many times. I've given many copies to people. It is an absolutely wonderful book. Heartbreaking, smile-inducing, mind-opening book. It's tiny, and if you are one of the legions of people who has read H is for Hawk and liked it, you have to find a copy of this book and read it. It's William Service, Owl, in which he adopts a small owl out of the wilderness, and it observes the owl as it wanders around his home. and the book has a few very nice original illustrations, and it has a poetic leanness to it, and it has a wonderful ending. Just a totally memorable ending. One paragraph in particular. It's one of a surprisingly large number of memoirs of people adopting owls, but it's by far the best ones. But it's one of the best of that weird subgenre of nature writing in which humans don't go to nature, like Tom McInerney, but where they bring nature to them, where they adopt into their homes some unconventional animal. That's a gigantic subset of the genre of nature writing. And The Ring of Bright Water, for instance, being another perfect example. Or even, I would say, Born Free, where the animal comes to the human world instead of the opposite. And this is a wonderful example of it. So I highly recommend it. If you live in the back and beyond in rural New Zealand and you want a copy of the book, but know that you will never find one and don't want to pay exorbitant internet prices, just say so in the comments. I come across copies. I do a lot more used book hunting than most of you probably. Well, I used to. I have a puppy now, so I don't quite get out as often as I used to. But though that period isn't going to last forever, the puppy, as I tell her every day while she's chewing on my nose, I tell her every day, you know, I'm not going to stay housebound with you forever. That's not going to happen. You are gradually going to learn enough, control yourself enough so that I can leave you for 2 or 3 hours at a time without worrying about the end of the world, without worrying that nuclear codes are going to be disseminated. I keep telling her that, and that will happen. It will happen just naturally, but it hasn't happened yet. But when I do, I see copies of Owl, and I would be happy to find one for you. And the next one will go out of the world of nature and into the world of man, the very rarefied world of man. This is a wonderful book by an author who didn't always hit her stride. So put it nice and generously. This is Knole and the Sackvilles by Vita Sackville West. And it's about the sprawling city-sized house or stately home that she grew up in, the ancestral home of her family, that she could not inherit because she was a woman. And this is I happened to find online a picture of the cover of the paperback edition that I have. I didn't want to load paperbacks over here when I could just have the iPad. But the stories that she tells of the many generations of Sackvilles at Knole are incredible. They really bring out the best in her writing, which she wrote a lot. Vita Sackville West wrote a lot. She wrote a lot for money. She wrote a lot under deadline. And she tried a lot of things, which is always commendable, but she's a hit-or-miss author. And this is a hit by far. Oh, my God. What an amazing book. And then we have an oldie but a goodie, not quite as old as Gerald of Wales, and something that an author I endlessly recommend, although it's a losing cause. It's William Dean Howells, who, when he was just a young man, just in his 20s, took a job writing one of those quickie presidential biographies, a campaign biography for sale in bookstores for curious readers and potential voters. And in response, in payment for the really good job that he did on that campaign biography, his candidate, who went on to win the election, who was Abraham Lincoln, gave him a job as consul in Venice. Just a complete, tit for tat thing. And he took his family and moved to Venice and wrote about it, as William Dean Howells wrote about everything. With almost no exceptions, he wrote about everything. And the book that resulted was Venetian Life, which is, I have read every single book there is to be written on my beloved Venice. And it's right up there. It's in the top 20, especially in the top 10 written in English. It's an amazing snapshot of Venice that is now gone. But he's so engaging, more so, I think, than in his fiction, much like Vita, Sackville, West. I think his nonfiction is where he really shines. I really wish that there were... this, for instance, is a cover of a new reprint, a relatively new, I think it's 25 years old, a very pretty paperback reprint of Howells' Venetian Life. And they also did, the same publisher did one for a book of his called Italian Journeys, where it's the same thing. It's vignettes of travel only from all of Italy, not just Venice. And I really wish that some publisher, or maybe even Penguin Classics, would bring out some of his other nonfiction, which might show up on these recommendation videos. He did, for instance, a couple of volumes of literary reminiscences. He knew everybody in the literary world in America and in Europe, and wrote about them affectionately because they liked him and he liked them. And those volumes, I have them. They turn up from time to time at bookstores like the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, but the larger reading public never sees them anymore, and that's a shame. They're really good. And then the next book, next one, a recommendation we're going to do here is a strange one. I've recommended it, I think, on this channel before. It's a self-published work from years ago. I came across it because I review a lot of self-published work, and it stuck with me. It's just interesting, just genuinely thought-provoking. And its contents have gotten more thought-provoking as time goes on. At the time, I thought it was a little out there. But events have largely substantiated a lot of the ideas of the author. The author is Alan Brooke, and the book is The Humem State. And the subtitle is The Emergence and Establishment of Our Extended Presence. And one of the aspects of what he means by that is our extended electronic presence. Does your electronic presence have a presence of viability on its own, apart from you? Does it perhaps have rights on its own, apart from you? Is it a person apart from you? Or if not a person, at least a community? I thought it was utterly fascinating. In the book, he talks a lot about a whole bunch of variations on our electronic persona that I hadn't thought about, including, for instance, social media sites that stay alive and thriving long after the person who created them has died. What is that? What is that? And what should it be legally? It's a fascinating book. I don't know if it's still in print. It was a self-published book, so it might not be. But I recommend it. And it's a perfect example of the kind of thing that nonfiction can do when it's done really well. Like I've mentioned before, when one author decides to dive deep on one subject, take notes, write up pages on the subway or the bus, and eventually come out with a book that isn't them doing a love triangle. It's them having delved deeply into this one subject and then come back out with what they think about it. I found it fascinating. And then the last book we'll do, last of the 9. Let me take a look at the time here. Oh, goodness gracious. All right. This will be the last one. And it's a slim thing, too. A lot of the books this time around are very skinny, so they won't take you long to do. They're not intimidating in any way. In addition to their subject matter, they're also not intimidating in their length. And this one is tiny, absolutely tiny, by a very good historian, by a historian I really like. His work, I like it a lot. His work is very controversial. If you were, for instance, were to call up any of his serious historical works on Amazon or Goodreads, I'm sure you would find a flood of negative reviews. I like that myself, and I have read them, and most of the negative criticism of him that I have read doesn't hold up. But His name is Jim Davidson, and he wrote a slim book on called One Mykonos, whose subtitle is "Being Ancient, Being Islands, Being Giants, Being Gay." But that's kind of silly. that's kind of publisher hyperbole. Really, it's more poetic than usual meditation on a raunchy holiday on Mykonos and gay enclaves in the Greek islands. And you wouldn't think that that would have a whole lot of appeal, but he's a wonderful writer. That's the whole appeal of it, is that he really draws you in to that world, so that you don't ever have to have experienced it. You don't ever have to have kissed a boy in Greece. I wholeheartedly recommend that experience. It's the place where the glory of kissing a boy as a subject was born and immortalized in some of the greatest prose and poetry that exists in the world today. It's an interesting variation on a theme, to put it one way. And Davidson knows that, and he knows the history as well as anybody. And as a result, his One Mykonos is really resonant. It's not. It reads more than just, what I did on my summer vacation. And that's it. That's 9 more recommendations for a Nonfiction November. And I'm going to wrap this up now, because I'm worried that these longer videos might be straining the MacBook. I know that's probably silly. If they weren't straining a tiny piece of plastic on my phone, they're probably not straining this computer. But this computer right now is the only way I have to make videos. So I'm still experimenting with a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to wrap this up now, but I'll have more Nonfiction November recommendations very soon, and I'll have other videos too. So I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.